In this video, I've decided to do something a little bit different than what I've done in previous videos, and I'm hoping to turn this into a little bit of a series. I'm going to do some replies to frequently asked questions. I get a lot of very similar questions about either techniques or forms or things about Tai Chi or Qigong, and I figure it would just be easier to consolidate instead of answering a million of the same questions individually, is to take those questions and compile them into like a frequently asked questions video series. Some of these questions will be coming from videos that I have posted, they'll be coming from emails that I've received, or they'll be coming from questions that I got while I was teaching classes. So the first question that we're discussing today is one that I received mostly while I was teaching classes. I've not received this one via email or posted on any of my videos. And the question is, what's the next move? So it's a question that I would receive while I was teaching a form to a student or teaching them techniques, and they would think that they had to move down well enough to move on to the next one, so they'd be like, okay, this is cool, but what's the next move? And when I first got this question, it was a little strange to me because it wasn't something that I would normally have ever asked my teachers. When I was training in China and in the United States under different instructors, I was always trained in a setting where the teacher decided when you were ready for the next move. So you didn't ask for the next move. You continued to practice until the teacher said, okay, what you're doing is good enough. You have the concept, you have, the technique, you have it down well enough that we can add to it with another move. And I found while I was training in China that was very much the way things went. Like, the teachers didn't really care for it when you said, okay, this is cool, but what's the next move? They wanted you to really dive into each move and try to understand it and get it down, and then they would decide when you moved on. But with teaching in America, I've discovered that it's generally expected that you show initiative, and so students, when they ask that question, it's not because they're trying to be disrespectful or because they're bored with the move they're working on, but they're trying to show initiative and interest in learning as much as they can from you as an instructor. And some of the instructors that I've met in the United States do prefer students to show initiative. So I think for the students out there who are wondering what the best way is to work with their instructor, it's to get to know your instructor. Maybe just ask them, is it appropriate in our classes for me to ask for the next movement of this form or the next technique that we're going to be working on? Or do I need to just focus on it until you say it's time to move on? Some instructors may say, I really like it when you show that initiative. I like when you're interested in the next thing and you're not just going to be stuck on one thing and not be interested in more of the art, and so they would prefer for you to ask them. And then other instructors, which I assume would probably be the majority, especially with traditional instructors, would say, no, I prefer for you to work on what I've told you to work on until I feel that you have it down, and then I'll let you know when it's time for you to move on. So your best bet is always ask the instructor and work with the person that is teaching you, work with their style of teaching and help them understand how you learn best so that you guys can really get the best out of the training time that you have together. My personal opinion on this, my preference on this, is when I'm working with a student and I say work on this thing, what I expect of them is that they work on that thing until I tell them it's time to move on to something else. Because as an instructor, the reason you're there is to help the student understand things that they wouldn't understand otherwise. You're teaching them something that you've had experience in. You know what to look for, what things need to be changed that maybe they wouldn't even notice in the first place. And so in my opinion, it's really the job of the instructor to decide the direction of training. If a student is wanting to focus, there is always give and take in a teacher-student relationship, and if the student's wanting to focus mainly on like forms for competition, well, that's something that the student, that's what they want to focus on. So the instructor then has the job of deciding the best course to get them to that goal. If the student's just wanting to work on health, then the instructor has the understanding and the knowledge to help them decide or to create the process that will help them reach that goal. And if they're wanting to focus on martial applications and the fighting side of whatever art they're studying, in my case Tai Chi, then it's the job of the instructor to set up the training course and decide what needs to be worked on and for how long it needs to be worked on before the student advances. So my answer is that it really comes down to knowing your instructor, knowing what they expect of you, knowing how they have the curriculum set up so that either they decide your next step or you play an active role in deciding your next step. But you need to talk to your instructor about that. If you don't know or if you're new to a place, usually the most respectful kind of attitude to take is that the instructor knows what they're doing and they will direct you when it's time to move on. And so it's your job to stay as dedicated and motivated and work as hard as possible on whatever they've shown you to work on. And when they see that, they'll move you on to something else as soon as you've reached a level of proficiency that allows you to move on to something else. So don't ever make the mistake of thinking that you understand a technique well enough that you can move on and the instructor just doesn't understand how well you understand it. They've been doing whatever art you're studying for much longer than you have, and it's best to trust their experience and trust their knowledge. And when they say, work on this a little bit longer, don't get offended. Don't be like, well, I'm doing what he said I was supposed to do and I'm doing it right. I don't see why I need to spend more time on it. Instead, take that as really good advice and dive into what it is that you're doing and look for anything that needs to be changed and ask for details. Say, okay, you want me to do it longer? I'm okay with that. Or, I totally respect that. What is it that you're looking for from me that I need to be doing different so that I really grasp this technique? And those are the kind of questions that instructors want to hear. They don't want to hear, well, I won't say all of them don't want to hear this, but I would say the majority, and I know I don't want to hear the question, what's the next move? I want to hear the question, what is it that I need to get down in this technique before I can move on to the next move? Like, what is it that you're looking for in this technique? What do I need to change? What do I need to fine tune? And when I get a question like that, I get excited. I'm like, all right, this is what we need to work on. But when a student asks, what's the next move? Like, they're kind of brushing aside the move that they're working on and the technique that they're working on, and feel as though they have it down really well in spite of what I see. It's, I don't want to say disrespectful because I don't really like it. It takes quite a bit to offend me. But I'll just say it isn't my favorite question. It isn't my favorite way for a student to approach their training, is to constantly be looking at the next thing instead of being focused on what they're doing at the time. And just a quick word of advice to the students out there who may be guilty of asking that question, what's the next move? Really what you're after is not how much information can you gather, it's how deep can you dive into the information that you've been given. And when you're given a technique and you do it a few times, you're like, okay, got this, I'm ready to move on to the next thing. There's probably a lot more to that technique that can be gained, and you're skipping a lot of the art by just trying to blow off that move and get to the next one, just try to accumulate as many moves as possible. What you really want to do is make that move a part of you and dive into it and soak it up and dig through it and dig deep into it and find as much as you can in that technique. And even when you move on to the next thing, it doesn't mean that you've mastered the one before. You're always trying to dig deeper into anything that you learn. You're always trying to get as much out of it as possible. And if you learn 3 techniques but learn them really, really well, you're better off than someone who's learned, 500 techniques and can kind of do them. So it's better to dive into what it is that you're given and to understand it as deep as possible and really grasp as much as you can before moving on to the next thing. And something too that I've had students do that I really appreciate is when I have them working on something and I'm like, okay, you have this down pretty well, you have it down to the degree that you need to have it before we move on, let's move on to the next thing. And they're like, I would rather spend more time on this technique that I'm working on and give it a little bit more time before I move on. To me, that's just like, the student gets it, like, I really appreciate this. And I mean, you don't want to stay on the same technique indefinitely and never move on, because you do need to understand, the breadth of your art and understand that there's more to it. But that desire to really grasp something and to really get it down and dive into it and spend as much time as possible on it without it being excessive before moving on to the next thing is just a really beautiful thing for me to see as an instructor. So in answer to the question, what's the next move? The answer is don't worry about it yet. You'll be shown when it's time to move on to the next thing. I hope that this video has been a little bit helpful for you if you are generally eager to move on to the next move when you're training. I hope it's given you an appreciation for diving deep into each move that you're taught and appreciating each moment that you're in while you're training rather than always looking to the next one. In this video, I want to talk to you about a product that I've been using for a lot of years now, something that I absolutely love, and if you're into taking supplements, you will probably absolutely love this too. It's called Daily Complete, and it's put out by a company called Pure Trim. This is what it looks like. And the reason I love this so much is because, 1, it's a liquid, so I don't have to swallow pills when I take it. 2, it has over 200 nutrients in it, so instead of taking several different supplements, trying to get the same amount of nutrients that I can get out of this bottle, I take 1 ounce of this and I'm done. Now, this is one of the products that I used extensively while I was over in China training, and I think it was invaluable for me for keeping my energy up and making sure I was getting proper nutrition while I was doing strenuous training all day long. Now the last thing that I really like about it, it's awesome, is it's just simple to take. So if you're like, all right, it's time to take my supplements with my lunch or whatever, you literally just open it up, get a little ounce glass out, pour yourself an ounce, done, swallow it. And that's it, you're done. You've taken your vitamins for the day. Another nice thing is it tastes pretty good. It basically just tastes like oranges and a hint of vitamin flavor to it, if you know what vitamins taste like. So anyway, I hope you try it out sometime if you're into taking supplements. If you're not, I still hope you try it out, and I hope you learn to love it as much as I do. Daily Complete.